Okay, let's try and unpack this. There's a pretty intense question floating around, isn't there? It really took off after that chat on The View.
Mm-hmm.
Whoopi Goldberg brought up this idea that the economic downturn we're seeing, this first contraction in 3 years might be, well, more than just policy going wrong.
Right. She hinted at something deliberate.
Exactly. She suggested former President Trump might actually be trying to damage the economy as retribution, she called it, against people who didn't back him.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
Yeah, she said, I believe he feels resentment towards the nation, and I think he's angry. Americans and our allies have not backed him, and now he's seeking retribution. Pretty direct.
It's definitely a significant claim, and it comes, right as we get this concrete data showing a shift. The U.S. economy did shrink 0.3% in Q1 2025.
The first dip in 3 years.
That's right. So it's natural. People are looking for reasons, trying to figure out, well, what's driving this?
Absolutely. And, well, President Trump himself, he's pushed back, hasn't he? Said it's not the tariffs, it's the Biden overhang, as he puts it.
He did say that. But it's hard to ignore the timing, especially how the markets reacted when those tariffs were actually announced.
Yeah, tell us about that reaction. It wasn't just a small wobble, was it?
No, not at all. What's really striking is how fast and how widespread it was. After the tariff news in April, the sell-off was sharp. The Dow Jones fell, what was it, over 21%?
21% in just 5 trading days.
In 5 days. And it wasn't just the U.S. Big drops overseas, too. The DAX in Germany, nearly 12%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng down about 14.5%.
Also, global reaction.
But here's the really unusual part. Usually when stocks fall, money rushes into safe havens, right? Like gold.
Right. Or maybe Bitcoin these days, some argue.
Exactly. But this time, gold went down 3.1%. Bitcoin dropped over 8%. Even crude oil fell.
So everything was falling together.
Pretty much. It points towards a broad liquidation. Institutions maybe getting margin calls, needing to sell assets quickly because values were dropping so fast. It suggests a real panic or forced selling, not just shifting investments around.
So less of a strategic shift, more of a get-me-out moment across the board. That paints a picture of, well, significant concern.
It certainly does. And when you look beyond the markets at the wider economic picture, it seems to back that up.
You mean the overall growth numbers?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, their early estimate for Q1, it was actually much worse than the headline, 0.3%. They projected an annualized contraction of 2.2%.
2.2%. That sounds serious.
It is. To give you some context, that'd be the biggest drop we've seen since the shock of the COVID pandemic first hit.
Wow, okay.
And adding fuel to that fire is consumer confidence. It's really taken a nosedive. Lowest level since 2021.
How low are we talking?
The Conference Board's expectations index, that's the bit looking forward, it fell to 65.2. Now, the threshold people watch is 80.
Why?
Historically, when that index drops below 80, it signals that consumers are getting pretty worried about the future. They tend to tighten their belts, spend less, and, well, that can sometimes be a leading indicator for a recession.
And this isn't just abstract stuff, is it? I saw the source material mention job losses, too. Around 250,000 government jobs.
That's right. And losing that many jobs, that has a very real, tangible effect. Those are families suddenly facing uncertainty, cutting back spending. It ripples outwards.
That can create a negative feedback loop, yeah.
Precisely. And a big part of this Q1 contraction story seems to be linked directly to those tariffs you mentioned earlier.
How so?
Well, remember that import surge. Businesses basically rushed to bring goods in before the tariffs hit. Imports spiked by over 41% at an annual rate in Q1.
Ah, so a temporary boost from trying to beat the clock.
Exactly. It inflated the import numbers then, but it also sort of sets the stage for the potential pain later once those tariffs are actually in effect and that pre-buying stops.
And the projected pain isn't minor, is it? I looked at the Wharton budget model analysis mentioned in the sources. They're talking serious long-term effects.
Very serious. Their projections suggest a potential 6% reduction in GDP overall and wages, down by about 5%.
6% of GDP, 5% of wages. That's huge. That's not just numbers on a page. That hits people's wallets hard.
Absolutely. Wharton translated that. For an average middle-income household, they estimate it could mean losing around $22,000 in earnings over their lifetime because of these policies.
$22,000, wow.
Okay, and you see that reflected back in the confidence numbers again. After falling for 5 straight months, the main index hit 86 in April. lowest since May 2020, deep in the pandemic uncertainty.
And the expectations index you mentioned, the one below 80?
Fell even further, down to 54.4, really deep in that territory that signals recessionary fears.
Is this worry concentrated in certain groups, or is it pretty widespread?
It seems quite broad, actually, but the data showed particularly sharp drops among people aged 35 to 55, and also in households earning more than $125,000 a year.
So prime working years and higher earners feeling a significant chill. That's telling.
It suggests unease is filtering through different parts of the economy, but maybe the most immediate thing for you listening at home is the projected cost increases.
For everyday stuff.
Yeah, essential goods. Clothing and textiles, for example, they're projected to go up by potentially 17%.
17% on clothes. Ouch.
And when you add up all the 2025 tariffs, the estimate is that the average family faces consumer losses, meaning higher prices or reduced purchasing power equivalent to about $3,800 a year.
$3,800. Okay, that puts a very concrete number on the potential impact for an average family budget.
It really does.
So let's circle back then to where we started, Whoopi Goldberg's theory, this idea of deliberate economic harm, revenge even. It's a strong claim. How did her co-host react?
Well, there were different takes on the view, as you'd expect. Sunny Hostin seems skeptical about Trump's economic acumen, maybe, suggesting this kind of downturn wasn't entirely surprising given his track record.
What sort of things from his past record might make someone like Miss Hostin say that, just generally speaking?
Well, critics sometimes point to things like the rise in national debt during his term, or maybe the outcomes of previous trade disputes as reasons for concern about his approach to, long-term economic health.
Okay. And Alyssa Farah Griffin, she worked in his administration.
Right. She made an interesting point, noting that his current approach, especially with these very broad tariffs, seems different from what he did in his first term.
Different how? What were the key differences in approach, based on what she might be referring to?
Well, in the first term, tariffs were definitely used, but perhaps more targeted. Specific industries, specific countries, like China, obviously. This round feels broader, maybe potentially more disruptive across the board to supply chains globally.
Got it. And Joy Behar chimed in too.
Yeah, she questioned the logic, didn't she? Like, if the goal was intentional harm, why use something as blunt and potentially self-damaging as broad tariffs? Wouldn't there be, more effective ways?
A fair question. And Farah Griffin's response pointed towards.
Advisor Peter Navarro's influence, suggesting maybe these specific policies stem more from his long-held beliefs that Trump has adopted.
So we've got a spectrum of views there. Deliberate revenge, maybe miscalculation based on questionable expertise, or perhaps just the outcome of specific, possibly controversial policy advice.
Exactly. It highlights the difficulty in pinning down intent. But regardless of the why, the what seems pretty clear from the data we have.
Meaning the economic impact.
Yes. Whether it's intentional, accidental, or somewhere in between, the consequences for everyday people seem to be emerging. We're seeing the data on potential job impacts, the hit to confidence, which affects spending, and those very real price increases for essentials.
That $3,800 annual loss figure per family really drives home the potential financial strain.
It does. And when you layer on those bigger picture worries, the projected hits to GDP, to wages over the long run, it definitely paints a concerning outlook for households thinking about their future economic security.
So as you're listening to all this, digesting these numbers and perspectives, it really makes you think, doesn't it? How does this unfolding situation feel to you? Because it seemed like, I don't know, straightforward mismanagement. Does the deliberate action idea resonate at all? Or is it just a messy combination of politics, policy, and maybe unforeseen consequences?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how economic policy gets intertwined with this kind of public debate and speculation about motives. The narrative around why this is happening can be almost as impactful as the economic shifts themselves, influencing how people feel and react.
Okay, so we've did a pretty deep dive here. We've looked at this first economic contraction quite a while, the really volatile market reaction to the tariffs, that worrying drop in consumer confidence, and the potential long-term impacts on growth, jobs, wages, and your cost of living. It's definitely complex.
It certainly is. No easy answers. And as you continue to watch how things develop, maybe the question to keep in mind is this. Given everything we've discussed, the data, the different interpretations, what do you think the long-term effects of these economic shifts could be? Not just for the country overall, but for your own household, your own financial situation. It's definitely a story that's still unfolding.